as we look to our future health and our current energy levels, the role of cardiorespiratory fitness is really critical. VO2 Max has moved out of the athlete's domain into the lounge, into the clinic, into the medical room for good reason. Your ability to consume oxygen will probably be the defining feature of your lifespan. Welcome to the Energy Equation, optimized by Pure Sport. I'm Ollie Patrick, a physiologist with 25 years of trying to work out who is well and who is not, and where energy plays a crucial role in the happiness and functionality of all human beings. In these special episodes, which subsidize our guest interviews, we dive deeper into some of the themes that we discuss with our guests and try and clear the muddied water so you can understand the science of energy. One of the topics we talk about frequently is fitness. Actually, a pretty terrible word. The word fitness doesn't really mean anything. Fit for what? Fit to get out of my chair? Fit to run a 5K? Fit to run a marathon? Fit to fly an aeroplane? Fundamentally, what we're talking about with fitness is, does the body have sufficient biological capability to manufacture energy? And there's one term that frequently comes up on the energy equation, and that term is VO2 max. And that's what I want to talk about today. Now, when people get interested in longevity, that shouldn't be 70 and 80-year-olds trying to extend their quality of life. That should be all of you at any point from the age of 20, 30, 40 onwards saying, the higher my VO2 max in my 30s and 40s, the more space I've got for it to appreciate year on year up until my 90s and hopefully into my 100s. So fundamentally, VO2 max is this core parameter of life, but we're also interested in it as it seems to correlate with an improved ability to go into physiological calm, the other parameter that we capture on the energy equation. The higher the VO2 max, we'll often find a slightly slower resting heart rate, and we may find a higher abundance of the nervous system associated with calm, what we call the parasympathetic nervous system. So I'm interested in people's cardiorespiratory fitness because I want them to live long, of course, but that feels very future-centric. I'm more interested about those present-day benefits in terms of the ability to combust quality energy and feel energized, the quality of their immune system, and the quality of their ability to go into physiological calm and restore energy. So VO2 max sits at the heart of how well we feel, not just how long we may live. What affects it? Well, the reason we lose about 10% per decade after 40 and 15% thereafter is the biggest single factor affecting your VO2 max will be the strength of your heart. So how much blood your heart can pump per pump is the main determining feature. And what you'll know is when you do cardiovascular exercise or cardiorespiratory exercise and that heart rate rises and stays risen, you actually change the anatomical structure of your heart. It will become stronger. It may become bigger. And for every pump, it's able to pump out more blood. And what that does is, if you've got a heart rate of 150 with a slightly larger heart, what you pump out in that 150 is significantly more blood than it would have been when you had the smaller heart. So you can deliver more oxygen, which means you can deliver more work. Now, in real terms, that might mean you can now suddenly run 5 kilometers, or you can cycle with your friends on the weekend. But anatomically, this heart strength and anatomy is a vital piece of VO2 max. And as we age, unfortunately, our hearts get a little stiffer, a little more rigid. That's also one of the reasons that your maximum heart rate, the beats your heart can go to, does get lower year on year. A formula for working out roughly what your maximum heart rate is has always been the number 220 minus your age. So the theoretical maximal heart rate of a 40-year-old would be 180 beats per minute. And then when they're 50, that would be 170 beats per minute. There'll be great variance in that. And we see fitter individuals tend to be able to keep their top-end heart rate higher for longer. And that might be, again, the role of this exercise on the structure of the heart itself. Again, without turning too morbid, I want this to be about energy. Most of the planet is dying from cardiovascular disease. That's the biggest killer on the planet. And the biggest feature in that is how well our heart works. So we see this strong correlation between cardiovascular exercise, the strength of the heart, energy, longevity, and avoidance of cardiovascular disease. There are many nuances to that, but that's a really strong logical pathway. Is there a less appealing discussion than VO2 max? It immediately sounds off-putting, overtly technical, and unfriendly. And I want to soften it and make you as excited about it as I am. The term itself, VO2 max, is talking about cardiorespiratory fitness, the functionality of my airways, my respiratory system, and my heart to deliver oxygen to my tissues and get rid of the byproduct of energy, carbon dioxide. And cardiorespiratory fitness is vitally important to all things, as we'll discuss, but we can measure it. VO2 Max is a measurement unit that says how much oxygen can I, as a machine, consume in 1 minute. And that's what VO2 Max represents, the maximum consumption of oxygen in 1 minute per kilogram of my body weight. So I've got to frame that by going back a step. Human beings run on oxygen, and we extract that oxygen from the air we breathe. So I'm going to breathe in the ambient air in this room. It's going to enter my system with about 21% oxygen, but when it comes out as expired air, it's got less oxygen in it. About 17% is oxygen. So some of the oxygen from the air has disappeared. I've extracted it from the air and I've put it into my blood, I've pumped it around my body, and I've used it physically to combust energy. And humans smash oxygen together with glucose or something else to manufacture energy. That's how we combust. And VO2 Max is saying, let's imagine I was doing the hardest exercise I could do for 1 minute. How much oxygen entered my body but never left? What was the consumption of oxygen in 1 minute? And if I was cycling up a hill at my absolute maximum, so my heart rate is at its top end, over that 1 minute, I might consume 5 liters of oxygen. And let's imagine, because my maths isn't great, I weighed 100 kilograms. I would take that 5,000 milliliters of oxygen, I would divide it by 100 kilograms of weight, and I would be left with a VO2 max of 50 milliliters per kilogram over that minute. And that's the term. Now, this may already feel too technical. This may already feel too sports sciencey, but I want to bring your attention to a crucial point. That number, that VO2 max, is likely the best single predictor of your life expectancy, of my life expectancy. This isn't a show about athletic performance. This isn't a show about how elite athletes optimize their training. This is a podcast for you in how you optimize energy, and the main currency of energy is oxygen. VO2 Max has moved out of the athlete's domain into the lounge, into the clinic, into the medical room for good reason. Your ability to consume oxygen will probably be the defining feature of your lifespan. There are many other factors, and I'm creating an exciting soundbite by saying that, but the data seems to be true. A huge study on a group of individuals across the Scandinavian territories showed that if I increase someone's VO2 max in a male by 1 milliliter, that equates to 45 days extra life expectancy. That's pretty good. So this number is seemingly correlating to enhanced length of life. It's also associated with improved quality of life. Why? Because within VO2 max and that ability to consume oxygen, I have a role in energy. And that energy isn't, as we might think about it, just how much get up and go I've got first thing in the morning. Do I need a double espresso to get rocking and rolling? No, that energy is also the energy that powers my immune system. What happens if a virus comes along? Well, you could argue someone's cardiorespiratory fitness measured through VO2 max would have a correlation with the quality of their immune response. And we do see that. And in many cases, what we see as people determining that's a problem of old age is not actually old age. It's a challenge of depreciating cardiorespiratory fitness as we age. And that is one of the horrors of VO2 max. Our body as a machine, I've spoken about it before on the podcast, is pretty rock star until about 35. Now, that might be 30 for some, that might be 40 for others. But all the effervescence of our youth, all those stem cells, all those positive hormones, testosterone, estrogen, they just start to taper and dip off as we enter somewhere around that age. And what we see is as we age past that midpoint, we see a depreciation, a drop in core biological systems, most notably cardiorespiratory. So you might start to lose about 10% of your VO2 max from somewhere around the age of 40. And then over 50, that might be 15% per decade thereafter. And that VO2 max is not just, again, my ability to cycle hard for a minute. That VO2 max is my ability to get to the shops and pick up my local groceries. That VO2 max is my ability to climb the hill without running out of puff. And fundamentally, we're interested in VO2 Max from a functionality point of view and retaining your independence for as long as possible. Just 3 years ago, a £10 supplement from Amazon stripped Team GB of an Olympic medal, and it could have ended a lot worse. Imagine the scene. Just days before the men's 100-metre relay final, a British sprinter, in search of convenience and trust, turned to a seemingly harmless, everyday supplement from Amazon. Little did he know, this entirely legal supplement was laced with prohibited substances capable of causing life-threatening conditions. This incident lays bare a critical truth: the sheer importance of knowing exactly what enters your body, even when it comes to everyday supplements. Enter Pure Sport, the supplements I use and trust. Just natural, effective, and Informed Sport certified. Informed Sport is a third-party program who test every single batch from Pure Sport, ensuring that what you consume is exactly what you expect. For peace of mind with your everyday supplements, visit puresport.co and use the code EE10 for 10% off. So how does this tie back to your day-to-day existence? Well, it does tie back to exercise. And we had a really interesting discussion with Paul Alima over the fact that as an elite-level footballer and rugby player, he hated cardio. And cardio, this shortened version of cardiovascular exercise, often also called aerobic exercise, aerobic meaning with oxygen. Now, Paul hated that. In fact, he cited the fact that he felt professional footballers were just cross-country runners, one of my favorite quotes of the series. And he never had that great engine because he was more predisposed to short bursts of activity, a sprinter's physique and a sprinter's physiology. And that's absolutely true. We do have a genetic preference to be an endurance athlete or more of a strength athlete and power athlete. And Paul certainly has the physique and storytelling of the latter. However, what we specialize in is not necessarily as important outside of school and sport, because in human physiology, your body doesn't want to be a specialist in strength at the cost of endurance and cardiorespiratory fitness. And one of the things I was trying to encourage Paul to do was to increase his aerobic exercise, his cardiovascular exercise, because this particular form of exercise will pay great dividends into how calm he is and how able he is to move into quality sleep. Two things that were highly relevant for him. We also see in Paul and Sir Steve Redgrave a great challenge to VO2 Max, which is the fact it's milliliters of oxygen per kilogram. And that kilogram piece matters. Both of those guests over 100 kilograms, they cannot be the same cardiovascular athlete as their 60 or 50 kilogram counterpart. Human physiology is about relative. My heart may be big, but is it big enough relative to the size of the rest of my body? And for every kilogram we lose, assuming that weight is fat tissue rather than muscle tissue, we actually get slightly fitter. Isn't that fantastic? And when we see big improvements in VO2 Max, it's normally a bit of a double whammy. We see someone increasing their physical activity levels, and some of that being activity that's aerobic, gets them breathless. Good examples are rowing, not at Sir Steve Redgrave's level, but rowing, swimming, cycling, running, fast walking. So they're building the strength of the heart, they're building this anatomical change in their system, and concurrently, they're losing 1, 2, 3 kilograms. So we've got a bigger system with less mouths to feed. And when we see those improvements in VO2 max of, again, 3, 4 milliliters per kilogram, let's imagine 10%, we see something like 20 or 30% reduction in cardiovascular disease incidence. So that's a huge benefit. But realistically, what would those people cite is hopefully more energy, more availability of energy to battle, again, small viruses, bugs, colds, all the things that we might distinguish as being energy, but for me are very much squarely an energy discussion. So VO2 max is directly linked to our body composition and our weight, but also the volume of exercise we do that does get us breathless. When we think about the government guidelines, we have to reconcile there are different systems of biology that should be targeted by different types of exercise. Being great at cardio doesn't mean you're strong, and being fantastically strong doesn't mean you're flexible. And the government guidelines say that we should get between 150 minutes of moderate intensity cardio or 75 minutes of intense every week. And that's probably 2 to 3 sessions. But that's on top of 2 strength training sessions, which is on top of 2 mobility sessions. And what we tend to find often with our guests is they've chosen one area of fitness to specialize in. Paul has specialized in muscle mass, but Paul's body also needs mobility. It also needs cardiorespiratory. And the great danger is we specialize in the area we most enjoy rather than specializing in all three areas which our physiology loves. And what we're encouraged to do in school is to focus on our strengths. I'm more naturally lean and my body is thinner because my somatotype, as we call it, my body shape, is predisposed to endurance. So I might be put into cross-country. As Paul says, I might be a cross-country football player because I'm getting endurance activities. Whereas my broader-shouldered counterpart might be put into rugby or weightlifting or shot put. And that might lead to both of us winning lots of medals through our schooling lives. But as adults over 35, I need to work on my area of weakness, strength, and the shot putter needs to work on their area of weakness, cardio. And we both need to make sure we're as mobile as possible through stretching and core stability and mobility work, because if we load up an inflexible, stiff system, it'll just get injured whenever we do anything. So those government guidelines, which no one looks at, are actually quite good. Cardio, 150 minutes, strength twice a week, mobility twice a week. And if this is the first time you're thinking about exercise, that's not an all or nothing situation. Every single additional step you take, every time you lift a little bit of weight, every time you do a little stretch, we think of that as a vote for you. Fantastic. The body isn't binary. It doesn't need all or nothing. It just needs a little bit more. And certainly in the case of Emily English, we saw someone who hadn't done high volumes of training, but had focused on low intensity cardio as the bedrock of their lifestyle. Emily's a great example of tailoring your exercise perfectly to your situation. At the moment, she is busy. She's rightfully being pulled in many different directions and her career is flourishing and we love it. And that brings a huge amount of physiological stress. So that may not be the time to do hard exercise. And what Emily's done is realized her body responds very well to low intensity, steady state cardiovascular exercise in nature. In fact, her activity score was probably the highest we've had on the energy equation through the sheer volume of steps she encounters daily. And that approach really ties with the science of VO2 Max, that we don't have to do that much work in the high intensity, certainly not as much as most people think. We tend to grade exercise in the cardiovascular frame by how high my heart rate rises, with 100% being that maximum heart rate. So for me, a male in my mid-40s, can I get my maximum heart rate up somewhere between 165, 175 beats per minute? That would be zone 5. And me sat here doing very little, chatting to you, I'd be in zone 0. And we basically categorize these different heart rate bands between 0 and 5, with 5 being maximum, 0 being sedentary. And you'll hear an awful lot of people talking about zone 2. Zone 2 is that heart rate range, somewhere around 65% of your maximum, where you're doing something. You might be on a bike, you might be on a rowing machine, you might be swimming, but you could still hold quite a nice conversation. You might have a little pause for breath in between the conversation, but you're still very much comfortable and could do it for quite a long period of time. And again, drawing from the world of elite sports science, we don't want to do all our training in this high intensity area because that is exhausting, requires a long period to recover from, and can be quite painful. In fact, it puts a lot of people off from exercise. And in elite sports programming, we might find about 80% of the work that those athletes do in this zone 2 area, this kind to yourself category, where you're not busting a gut, but you're enjoying it, you're conversational, hopefully you're socializing. Very much Emily's approach, low, zone 1, zone 2. And what we saw with that is Emily actually had a really good VO2 max, largely through weight control and good quality zone 2 exercise, a brilliant blend. Whereas those athletes who just go feast and famine may not have the same benefit from those intense short burst exercise sessions, which won't create that anatomical structure that the low intensity work does. So I'm telling you, it's worth being kind to yourself. And I'm also telling you, if you go out for that easy stuff, that may be the exact right pathway to both decompressing from stress, but also building this incredibly important parameter, VO2 max. So you may not be a forthcoming guest on the energy equation and you're thinking, Ollie, how am I going to get my VO2 max measured? Because now I'm excited about it. Well, there's lots of ways of doing it. The only true way to measure an absolute VO2 max is quite a tough test. You put a mask on your face and it literally measures all the air going in, all the air coming out, and it measures how much oxygen you consume as you cycle or run to exhaustion. So a lot of people don't particularly enjoy that. But with modern science, we found clever ways to estimate VO2 max by saying we had 100 people do that brutal bike test, and then we got them to do another task, and we found a way of matching those two pieces of data together. And you may find your smartwatch is already able to calculate a VO2 max. The accuracy of those I can't talk to in all cases, but I will say they're generally accurate against themselves. So if your watch is recording a VO2 max of 30 and then it goes up to 32, we know it's improving. If it goes down to 28, we know it's diminishing. What number should it be? That's always really tricky because we have a range of age-predicted norms pulling from a multitude of databases. I often use the number 32 with my guests because it seems that below 32, there may be some increased health risks that aren't there above 32. But it's linear. There's not a point where your VO2 max becomes a problem or it's not a problem. The higher it is, the better you are. And actually, it's one of the only known physiological parameters that has no upper limit of benefit. That's really odd. There are some things that aren't meant to be higher or lower. Blood pressure, you don't want it too high, too low. Glucose, too high, too low. VO2 max, we want it as high as possible. So there's no observed upper limit of when it starts to become a problem. That's hugely important. And again, the rise of VO2 max as a parameter has led organizations like the American Heart Association to say, maybe this should be taken as part of a standard GP consultation. Within the energy equation, I use two methods to capture VO2 max, neither of which are the brutal mask, because our guests just wouldn't want to come on. One is a walking test that looks at a change in heart rate over a standardized 30-minute walk. And the other device, which I use to back it up, is something called seismocardiography, where I put a little device on someone's chest and measure the shock waves of the heart to correlate into their VO2 max. And both those results give me a chance to say, is this an area that might be worth some increased focus from a cardiovascular point of view? Or is this an area we should champion and cheer and not worry that I'm not meeting government guidelines, but I am fit enough? From my perspective, VO2 max is a really lovely barometer of, is my training enough? If I've got a VO2 max of 35 and I'm not sure whether I'm doing enough with my tennis or my walk to the school or whatever it might be, I just track it over time. If it stays at 35, the argument there is it's probably enough. If it's dropping to 34, you might need a little bit more. We have to be careful, particularly on the energy equation, but also in the real world, not to let numbers dictate how we feel. If you feel fantastic, high energy, and the sleep's not correlating, your VO2 max isn't there, you shouldn't override that self-reported energy. And that's the reason on our discussions, we always ask our guests, what's your number? And that's much more important than my number. But as we look to our future health and our current energy levels, the role of cardiorespiratory fitness captured through VO2 max is really critical. And for you, if this is a catalyst to think, maybe I won't just lift weights this week, or maybe I will go for that long walk, or maybe I will keep an eye on this parameter to keep me accountable, to keep stimulating my heart and growing it and keeping it as well as I can for as long as I can, then I'd be delighted with that. As with all things energy equation, there's no rules, there's a framework. And if your VO2 max is good and improving, I love it. If it's not where it wants to be, at any age and any stage, you can increase it, which is hugely exciting. And I hope this has given some clarity to an area that plays into energy at every level and every age.